There we are. Thank you, Haley. I appreciate the introduction here and the opportunity. My name is Garrett Cook. I lead our security engineering teams here at Tenable's U.S. Public Sector. On behalf of Tenable, just extremely grateful for the thought leadership coming out of ATARC and everyone's time this morning. I know people are busy, so we'll get to our content. I'm joined today by two of engineers on our U.S. Public Sector team. Be sharing the presentation responsibilities with me. First, Seth Matheson, a distinguished engineer at Tenable, and as well as Joe Decker, a senior security engineer at Tenable. I'll jump to our respective parts. We wanted to take some time today to first and foremost introduce Tenable for those that may not be familiar with what Tenable does, or maybe they are, but not necessarily familiar with what we're doing most recently. And then we want to discuss some principles around our point of view on where we can help agencies meet their mission as they work towards the zero trust architecture. And then we'll share with the group some reference architectures that I think will help visualize where you may be able to deploy our solutions as part of your overarching zero trust strategy, and highlight some of the key integrations that we think are really paramount towards the effort. So with that said, just a quick introduction on Tenable. Tenable today has over 40,000 different organizations and agencies globally that we service. We are prioritizing coverage across the entire modern attack surface. The way we think about that is not only traditional IT, but providing best of breed sensors to enumerate and assess assets from everything from IT to OT to cloud. And we'll talk about some more of that in a bit here. But on top of all of that data, we try to, for everything that we do, we try to provide a level of prediction around what threats and vulnerabilities might be acted upon first and foremost to reduce risk. It's sort of a philosophy that persists across all of our solutions. As a result, we're #1 in the VM market share for 3 years running, according to IDC. We have the #1 in coverage, according to different research out of Forrester around accuracy and zero-day research. And we provide over 100 integrations with leading industry partners that we'll highlight for the group. So just a real quick pitch on our research. We think this is a real differentiator for our customers to consider as they take on zero trust. It's really the idea that foundational to every zero trust implementation is the need to enumerate and assess everything in the environment before you can really make educated policy decisions on whether you trust a person or an asset. And so as highlighted here, some highlights coming out of our research team, our security research teams, over 350 different 0 days that have been disclosed since January of 2019. Today, we enumerate and assess over 67,000 vulnerabilities, and we provide an under 24-hour SLA for the median time for coverage for high-profile issues. So Log4j, et cetera, are things that you can depend on Tenable to be able to enumerate and assess the moment they become critical for your agency or enterprise. Now an opportunity to just level set on understanding zero trust. This is some highlights coming out of the NIST publication, 800-207. I think everyone, or a lot of folks on this phone call or this Zoom rather, are familiar with that. But just to level set for all of us, when you look at zero trust, it's not a singular solution. We hear a lot of customers call us and ask us for us to present on, do we have a zero trust solution, or what's the singular zero trust vendor that we compete with, et cetera. And it's not the way that we think about it. It's certainly not the way that it's going to be implemented in practice. It's really a framework. It's a collections of solutions and services It's a group of cooperating vendors or integrated vendors that are working together to provide a zero trust implementation. And that path is going to be highly dependent on a lot of different variables for agencies and enterprise. First and foremost, what solutions are you using today? And how can you best take advantage of some of those to begin your zero trust journey? And then where will you need to augment your solutions to realize that implementation? So now, just talk to Tenable's zero trust point of view. There's three overarching pillars, how we think about the problem, at least in terms of how we can help. First and foremost, we believe that trust is dependent on visibility, and that this is the very first task that most agencies and industry or enterprises will have to address before they can really start to work towards true zero trust. In other words, if you don't know if an asset exists, or an individual or an entity or an identity or an application, you have very little ability to address it from a policy engine perspective and make a decision on whether you trust it or not. So you need visibility across the entire attack surface, everything from IT to OT, AD, Azure, everything in between. And we must continuously assess assets for vulnerabilities, classify that those devices for a whole host of things, misconfigurations, study them to look to see the flow of sensitive data and be able to identify things like lateral movement or moves towards critical Active Directory infrastructure. So really the idea that trust is dependent on visibility is paramount here. The second thing is once we've enumerated and assessed everything in the environment, every asset, traditional IT and beyond, you need to establish some prioritization based on risk with literally, 20,000 plus vulnerabilities being disclosed.
Yes, hold on.
The previous year.
I'm coming.
Hey, Sarah, can you mute, please? Or Haley, can you help me mute?
I got it.
Thank you. The prioritization based on risk is this idea that we're going to apply a risk score to everything that we enumerate and assess. That's important, and we'll talk about this a lot, but it's the idea that in your zero trust endeavor that you can inform your policy engine with this dynamic risk data. This is stuff that's being enumerated. This stuff is being dynamically assessed daily based on real world risk. And we'll give you a lot of data on how we do this and how we think that your zero trust initiative might be able to consume this to further your mission. And then the third pillar here is this idea that at the very foundation of zero trust are the identity systems that enforce access and authorization. And in some cases, the policy decision itself may be coming from the identity systems. And so the idea that that these things themselves, it seems obvious, but these systems themselves have to continuously be assessed, and in many ways provide purpose-built assessment and sensors that specialize in ensuring that they're bulletproof. Without that, then a lot of zero trust efforts can simply be negated through threat actors gaining access to the quote unquote keys of the castle. Overarching all of this is just basic cyber hygiene. And this is something that we'll talk about too, because as we get into AI and machine learning, we do step back and say, hey, foundationally, basic cyber hygiene, the ability to enumerate and assess vulnerabilities across the environment, look at the compliance baselines for those assets, whether it's, no matter what that asset is, look at your identities. That's foundational. That's cyber hygiene, something you'll hear throughout our presentation. So the idea that trust is based on visibility was the first pillar that I mentioned, and I'll touch base on this quickly before I turn it over to Seth to talk about how we apply risk scores to all of this data. But this is sort of Tenable's modern attack surface. This is how we take a look at adaptive approaches to assess every asset. So you can kind of take a look at from bottom to top here in this blue wedge is this IT infrastructure that most of our customers are familiar with and tackling today to some order of magnitude, but now increasingly converged infrastructure and critical infrastructure around operational technology, things that control stuff in the real world, as well as wholesale shifts to cloud. Containers, applications, code, APIs, and all of the workloads across infrastructure as service providers and even private cloud, et cetera. This visualization here, I think, helps. If you look across the left and the right borders here, try to provide you a sense of the specialized sensors that we use to tackle all of this modern attack surface. So Tenable brings to market through both a SaaS offering as well as our on-premise offerings, different strategies to tackle this. We have a technology that we call frictionless assessment. This is idea that we use native cloud API or services to almost near real time assess ephemeral cloud assets and pull that into our data lake for consideration for policy engine. Things like agent assessment, agents that can persist on an endpoint to help you gain access and visibility into things like remote workforce. Passive assessment, east-west, north-south traffic over network lines to help you understand assets that are moving on the network and account for them. Active assessment, certainly Nessus, I think, is sort of one of the most commonly deployed solutions across vulnerability programs in the government, and as well as the 40,000 customers that I mentioned earlier. But that active assessment is foundational as well. So we also provide the ability to, do web application scanning, look at the code itself that might deploy assets now in the cloud via things like Terraform or Kubernetes. And then a full featured sensor to do both passive and active monitoring, safely assessing operational technology and bringing it into the same data lake for policy engine consideration. And then container scanning, so things like Docker, et cetera. So this is just a sort of a broad overview of the different sensors that we bring to bear and how we attack that first pillar. How do you enumerate and assess every asset within your environment to begin consideration for zero trust, the idea that you're going to make a policy decision based on an asset or an identity or a directory service, et cetera. Okay. I'd like to turn it over now to Seth Matheson to talk through, once we've gathered that data, how do we make sense of it? And how do we help you consume all of that information for programmatic consideration for zero trust? Seth, you with us?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Garrett. So with all of this information and information from all of your other tool sets as well, really, in order to do zero trust properly, you have to prioritize all the data. And you have to understand what in your environment is critical. So looking at that from a quantity perspective, we take all the data from a vulnerability, from a risk perspective, we look at the asset attributes, and we help narrow that down to what makes the most sense. There's no way that any organization is going to be able to patch everything in their environment on every single system. It's just not feasible. So part of zero trust is being able to prioritize that to address the critical findings on the critical systems. Next slide, Garrett. So reality, when you start to look at your systems, most of the vulnerabilities that you find are never actually going to be used in an attack, right? It's going to be the ones that are in exploit kits. It's going to be the ones that are being leveraged by state actors. It's going to be the ones that are easy. These folks, they don't want to take a lot of extra work to try to figure out what's going to get them into that one key system in your environment. They're going to use the flaws that already work, that are already integrated with their toolkits. And they use these because they do exist, right? They're not being patched appropriately. Can we mute folks? Haley, thank you. Next slide, Garrett. All right, so how does Tenable do this? We look at this from two directions. We look at it from a vulnerability perspective, and we look at it from an asset perspective. From a vulnerability perspective, we call this VPR, Vulnerability Priority Rating. Essentially, we take every CVE, every risk, and we take a lot of different inputs, a lot of different data points, and we predict what's the likelihood that this vulnerability is going to be exploited in the next 30 days. We combine this data with the criticality of the asset. So how critical is this asset to your business function? So it's not necessarily, how important is it to this individual internal team, but from a business perspective, from a continuity perspective, how important is this system? When you combine those two data sets, you have the most important vulnerabilities plus the most important assets. Now you have a very targeted list of things that you can address. And this optimizes your workflow and helps within the scope of Zero Trust to give you that prioritized list of things to address, and for your policy engines to say, hey, this is what needs to be allowed, this is what needs to be stopped, where you set that sort of risk threshold. Next slide. So specifically with vulnerability priority rating, like I said, this takes in somewhere above 150 different data points to calculate the likelihood of an exploit in the next month. This gets updated on a daily basis. So as we get new intel, whether it be from the dark web, social media, etc., on a specific vulnerability, this gets updated on a daily basis for all of our customers. So if a new vulnerability gets disclosed that doesn't have an exploit, but in 2 weeks it has one, we update the data to showcase the actual threat that vulnerability is posing. This is in contrast to the traditional sort of prioritization system that most traditional risk products use, often based on something like CVSS. That risk profile will never change. So if you have a vulnerability today that is a medium in terms of severity, then that's going to be a medium in severity in a month, in 6 months, in a year, in 10 years. It's never going to change, regardless of whether or not that vulnerability is actually being used in attacks. So what we do is we give this dynamic rating, we update that tracking real world data points to give you that prioritization. Next slide. A little bit on asset criticality. So again, this is looking at the business risk of an asset. How critical is this particular asset to my business processes? Different data points here include things like, what is this asset doing on my network? What kind of asset is it? Is it a standard Windows 10 system? Is it a domain controller? What does this device talk to? What does this device function as? Does it have a database on it? Is it exposed to the internet? Right? All of these go into being able to measure the criticality of an asset for business purposes. Now, Tenable takes a first pass at this. We don't know what is critical to customers' business, right? So if there's something in particular that's maybe a test environment, but is still a domain controller, you can change that asset criticality rating. But the key here is taking what is important to the business and helping use that to drive the prioritization of what you fix, right? Taking that data and saying, hey, these are the critical things to my business, plus the data sets from the vulnerability side. Those together give you a very targeted list of things to address and help to define that threshold within Zero Trust of making a yes/no decision to allow access. Next slide.
Oh, Lord.
Haley, thank you, Haley. So with ACR, one of the other things that we do is we talk about capabilities of that asset, right? Is this asset going to be in my environment actually causing or actually doing something that is relied on by other systems, other functionalities? Is it an integral part of my normal day-to-day operations? These sort of attributes put together help to define what an asset is and how critical it is to your business. Next slide. So in our tools, we help present this data in a way that makes sense to customers, being able to target and look at what the most critical vulnerabilities are on your most critical assets. And again, as we get new data into the tool, as we're constantly assessing your network, as we're getting threat data in, we help prioritize this and say, you know, this is how these things are changing over time. This is where you need to direct your focus this week. And all that data can feed into, again, the policy engine within Zero Trust to help make those risk-based decisions in an automated manner. So what might be allowed today based on the risk decision is based on the profile of that endpoint, of that persona, et cetera, might change next week given the criticality of an asset changing, given the risk profile of the vulnerabilities or risks on that system changing. All right. Next up, Joe Decker is going to talk about some identity systems within Zero Trust.
Thank you, Seth. So identity systems, right? You're looking at things like directory services and identity access management. And as the quote says, right, these are the infrastructure. This supports your authentication and authorization. These are the keys to the kingdom. And in Zero Trust, that compromise, if the keys to your kingdom are given up, it really makes any Zero Trust implementation ineffective, right? It's a great quote because it's really true. So you can really consider identity as the new perimeter. What makes that so dangerous is now the perimeter has tentacles into your entire environment. Once that's compromised, they can really go wherever they want. So this needs to be secure. Next slide, please. But can you trust that identity system, right? Can you trust how secure that is? And as new identity management solutions are brought in, we need to really apply those Zero Trust principles to them at the core. Because again, if this goes down, everything else goes down with it. They play a fundamental role in managing the digital identities and enforcing least privilege, which Zero Trust is all about least privilege. We need to make sure that we are not trusting people who don't need to be trusted, and also ensuring that people are only trusted as much as they should be. So we need to have that role-based access based on identities and what people truly need. And directory services like Active Directory and other, they are that infrastructure and software that most organizations use to manage all of this. And because it is the heart of controlling all those access rights, and it does have those tentacles, it's really the prime target for most attackers, right? 75% of attacks are done via compromised credentials. They get in there, and the first thing they want to do is find that credential they can use to then go ahead and escalate. And once they're there and they've exploited and they've granted themselves all the IT permissions that they need, they can then achieve their goals. They can steal vital data. They can steal state secrets. They can deploy ransomware to bring things down. In the Zero Trust context, we really need to ensure that that gets locked down. So preventing those directory service compromises, monitoring it for suspicious behavior, it's not only security best practice, but it's really foundational to security as a whole and paramount to the success of any Zero Trust initiative. The more resources that you trust, the more likely there's going to be a breach, whether it's just a test account, whether it's going to be something that doesn't get the correct Kerberos delegation. All of that stuff can really have a huge effect on security, right? With Zero Trust, you don't trust the users, assets, or applications in your network at all. You don't have that underlying trust. You start with zero trust on them. So we're going to replace that trust with continuous monitoring and validation. So you need to be able to continuously monitor what's going on in that environment, ensure that people are always at the level that they're supposed to be, and nothing new comes in. So we should be able to monitor and validate the users, the assets, your applications, the network activity, data access, see any abnormalities and vulnerabilities that happen before data theft occurs, right? Going from a reactive model, which is very important in a defense in depth strategy, to a more proactive model, closing down those gaps before they become an issue. And really, Tenable believes that the premise of zero trust extends beyond all of that. This needs to go to those underlying security systems, including identity access, so that we can have all of that secure and safe. Next slide, please. So Active Directory and identity is really the focal point for the entire company's security. It is that new perimeter. And if you're deploying a zero trust architecture, you have to ensure that every user is known, every user is managed in the appropriate way, that people have the correct access and only that access. So we need to enforce rights. We need to enforce privileges. And it's really where everything starts, right? This is the foundational piece of zero trust that really, if anything here goes down, the whole house of cards can fall down. So user credentials, inboxes, corporate and financial data, everything is ruled by that directory infrastructure. And it is, again, the keys to the kingdom, right? You have all of those tentacles really just diving deep in. So you need to make sure that an organization can evaluate those user rights and also control and enforce that privilege on those identities. Track anything that's changing, evolution in assets, evolution in user rights. Somebody gets promoted or somebody gets a new project and needs to have extra rights. That all needs to be tracked. We need to be able to detect lateral movement as well, right? Lateral movement is the one thing that an attacker is looking for. They want to get in, they want to find an account that they're able to move back and forth with. And so we need to make sure that nobody is able to do that, that they can't abuse IT rights. And we really need to continuously monitor for any risky user activities that could indicate a compromise. So having a tool like Tenable AD, like Tenable's tools that can do all of that, again, can be foundational, ensuring that everything is put in the right place, that everything is at the zero trust, that minimum level of trust for the organization to function. Next slide, please. So just to go through what one of these attacks looks like, right? So somebody comes in, generally they'll use a vulnerability, right? That one flaw that Seth talked about. So they get in now. So first thing they're going to do is start to phish, to harvest credentials, right? It takes one person to click on the wrong link. It takes one person to give up a password, and suddenly they have that credential they need. Once they're there, once they have that foothold, they can start to explore. They're going to use whoami commands, net commands like net user and net domain admins. They're going to find where they can then elevate. And that could be based off of a misconfiguration. That could be a Kerberos delegation that was left undelegated. So people now have the ability to grab hold of that and propagate to wherever they want. So once they've identified that target for credential theft to elevate those privileges, now they've got a domain admin, they've got a local admin, they can move where they want to go to, right? That's an effective means to get in there. And that could be done through a password spray, credential cast, but being able to monitor for that, you know that it happens right away, right? Seeing that a password spray is happening in real time, seeing that there's a brute force attack, seeing that somebody is setting up a DC sync or a DC shadow attack in real time can really cut them off at that elevate part. Next, they're going to try to evade detection. And once they actually have the ability to have those elevated privileges, this becomes easy. They've got that low and slow means. They're not just sitting there spraying hard. They're doing it in a method that may even appear as Bob just forgot his password, right? Something that's not necessarily going to set off alarms. Now they can take password hashes offline. They can harvest it from memory. They want to break that password, elevate privileges, but then also hide what they're doing because they're just doing what the user's allowed to do. And pen testers really do try to do this. That's one thing pen testers will do because they know that's what attackers will do. And once they've gotten in there, they've elevated, they've hidden what they're doing, now they can establish themselves in your environment. And a lot of these attacks that end in something like ransomware, they can take a long time, right? It may be that they were in there for a year, maybe even 2, pulling out any information they want, right? They've got data exfiltration, data encryption. They're putting ransomware onto different systems. And then finally, once they've got everything out, they click on that ransomware and suddenly everything gets shut down. So they're just grabbing some cash on the way out. They've already got everything they want. They've left the ports open they need. They've created shell sessions that don't have an expiration on target hosts. It's very dangerous. So having a product that can continuously monitor for these things, plus also help you to break it down, right? You need to find the weaknesses. You need to be able to find where those misconfigurations lie. As an engineer, I get to be a little bit nerdy, right? Seth talked about the one flaw, right? If we even take this outside of security, right? Let's look at Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. You've got the Death Star taken down by an exhaust port. You've got Helm's Deep taken down by a drainage ditch. All it takes is one flaw, one mistake, one vulnerability to really bring the whole thing down. So being able to look at those weaknesses, fix them proactively, make sure that we're monitoring that in real time for any changes, finding attacks happening in real time so that you can put a stop to them immediately, and also making sure you've got logging and the ability to dig in and see, this is where it came from. This is where it went to. These are the users that were affected. Disrupt those attack pathways. And by the way, if you can do this without agents or elevated privileges, you're not actually going to be introducing another attack surface that they can utilize. So I'd like to turn back over to Seth, who's going to go into a bit of our zero trust architecture.
Thanks, Joe. So we've talked about prioritization, we've talked about identity. How does this all fit into zero trust? So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but essentially, what is zero trust architecture, right? It's having an automated process for analyzing a connection, analyzing an action, and then allowing it based on your organization's risk profile, essentially. So what does Tenable do? Well, Tenable, we provide information to help make that decision better, right? We're constantly assessing the endpoints in your network. We're looking at the identity, IAM systems in your network, like Active Directory. We're telling you about the various risk profiles in your network from an exploitability perspective with VPR and other vulnerabilities in your network. We're looking at compliance and saying, does this system comply with your organizational policy? We help to feed all of that data into your policy engine so that you have good information to help make that decision better. And all of this, ideally happens in an automated fashion. Looking at purely the identity perspective, we look at essentially the user profile, the user action. We look at that whole key to the kingdom, that whole environment that has tendrils into every single part of your network from a authorization perspective. We make sure that systems can't, or users can't elevate privilege where they don't need to. We make sure that they can't move laterally, et cetera. And again, this is helping to secure that entire control plane to make sure that your actual users, your identities themselves don't pose that additional risk. Next slide. So within Zero Trust itself, this is where we fit in, right? We'll support up to 6 of these core pillars, depending on what you're looking for. With these, we are providing insight into these areas, and we're also providing data that showcases what specifically might need to be there to help that policy engine make a better decision. right? So we help with device authorization by telling you what these devices are. We look at things like endpoint response to say, hey, this is how this endpoint is configured. These are the vulnerabilities that are on this endpoint. We help with things like user authorization to say, what access does this user have, right? Does this identity within Active Directory have privileges it shouldn't, right? Are there flaws in your actual identity access tool that would allow this to elevate? So we're giving the policy engine the insight to make these better decisions. Next slide. From an architecture perspective, again, we'll all flow into that policy engine, whether it's an on-prem scenario, whether it's a cloud scenario. All of our different tool sets have full open APIs. Like Garrett mentioned at the beginning, we work with over 100 different vendors, 200 plus integrations with various products to help give this additional data to the policy engine to help it make a better decision. So regardless of what it is in your network, whether it's identity with Tenable AD, whether it's operational infrastructure with Tenable OT, whether it's your cloud infrastructure, we take all this data and we give it to the policy engine so it can make that better decision. Next slide. So again, Zero Trust is an ecosystem of products, right? It's not one solution, it's not one product. We integrate with a huge variety of partners to help provide them data to make sure that they have the information they need to help make better decisions. So anything from policy enforcement, maybe in a tool like Forescout, to providing data into a SOAR product like Splunk, to ticketing systems like ServiceNow and Jira. All that data can flow in an automatic perspective to help make better decisions. And next up, we're going to go back to Joe here, talk a little bit about CIS and Zero Trust.
Helps if I unmute. Thanks, Seth. So yeah, so CIS and Zero Trust, right? As we were going through all this, as we were really putting together Tenable's approach to Zero Trust, we realized that Zero Trust is foundational. And CIS is foundational, and we needed to put those together. And lucky for us, Kathleen Moriarty at CIS did it for us. She came up with this great diagram that really goes through. And you've got CIS and other standards that can really align into Zero Trust to have that foundational look, whether it's singular products or it's your entire ecosystem, as Seth was just going through. So if we look at some of these, right? All data services and computing services are considered resources. Everything is a resource according to Zero Trust. So you need to know where those things are, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's different providers and services that you're utilizing. All of that needs to be known. You can't protect what you can't see, right? That's the most foundational thing in security. If you don't know it exists, if you don't know that there's a Windows 98 machine sitting in a booth in a parking lot, that can be a huge gap in your security, right? So that first part is huge. Second is all communication is secured, regardless of location. We need to make sure that secure configuration is happening. We need to look at the way these items are configured, that they're hardened properly, that they have the limited amount of trust for them to communicate effectively and ensure that everything works together. But no more than that. If Telnet isn't needed, close Telnet. If you don't need these ports exposed, close them down. They don't need to be there for communication. They don't need to be there for things to be effective inside of your organization. Right. Next is access to individual enterprise resources are granted on a per session basis, right? Account management, access control management. If somebody needs something for a specific task, great, they can have that ability. But once that task is done, that needs to be removed. They don't need to continue to have that. So we need to ensure that everything is per session. If you have a auditor coming in who might need read-only access to a certain point, give it to them for that session, remove it after that. Next up is access to resources is determined by a dynamic policy, making sure that things are monitored, that we're looking at defense, that we're continuously monitoring so that this policy isn't just static, right? Static isn't zero trust. That has to constantly be revisited. We need to know exactly what is going on at the moment by continuously monitoring. All owned and associated devices in the most secure state possible. Again, that's going to be evaluating things for continuous vulnerability management, right? Doing those scans, doing those tests to ensure that the most risky vulnerabilities are shut down, using something like the VPR score to help you determine, hey, we've got 100 vulnerabilities, but these 5 are the ones that have exploits that are remotely exploitable and that could actually affect us in the next month. You need to be able to get those devices in the most secure state. And you do that by looking at risk and knocking things down, even outside of what Tenable does and that overall architecture, right? That defense in depth strategy, things like EDR and virus scanning, right? All of that helps to make things secure and prevent these attacks. Next, all the resource authentication authorization are dynamic and strictly enforced. That access control management, those configurations, what the users have access to, make sure that they're strictly enforced, that there's no way around it, that there's no backdoor, that there's no loophole, that you don't have that single flaw that's going to bring the entire thing down. And finally, to collect as much information as possible, right? Information is power here. The more information you have, the more ways you have to look at your network infrastructure, that you have to look at your perimeter, that your identity and these systems to ensure that you are keeping them as secure as possible. And again, doing this continuously. What makes sense now may not make sense a year from now. If we take a look at the pre-COVID world, we didn't have nearly the remote workforce that we have now. So things change as things happen in the world. We're going to continue to evaluate these standards and others. As new ones come in, we can always bring them in to help keep things secure, right? Zero trust does not have to be this monolithic, static thing. It can be something where we do find new standards or standards are improved. Consistently, things like CIS and the other standards improve themselves. They look at the world, they look at what's going on, and we can bring that in to really keep zero trust at that foundational level. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn back over to Garrett to close us out and bring up any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Joe, Seth. I greatly appreciate you guys moving through that. I just want to, for the group here, summarize what we talked about today, and then encourage you guys to, or the entire group, to ask questions if you have them via the chat, or you can welcome to come off mute if you'd like to ask myself or the Tenable team anything from the topics that we covered today. But just in review, we talked about the need to foundationally start with visibility first and foremost, the need to deploy best of breed sensors to enumerate and assess not only the silos that we may be responsible for, but look broadly across our networks to understand where our gaps are with things like OT or cloud or directory services or other sensors that may, or other assets that may go undisclosed in our environments and undermine our zero trust mission. We then talked about the need to secure your trucks. To secure your trust systems as a key piece, keeping the castle secure. Again, towards not undermining your zero trust implementation. We talked about integrating with the ecosystem. Most notably, we talked about Tenable's ability to expose things like risk scoring on all of the assets that we've been able to enumerate, and then freely share that programmatically with the solutions that you may be employing as part of your zero trust initiative. So policy engine comes most notably to mind, but certainly SIM, SOAR, CMDB, a whole host of different, sort of traditional network access control decision points. We freely share that data via supported integrations and connectors. We believe that we can very quickly help agencies consume that risk data off of every asset to further their zero trust cause straight away. And then this basic cyber hygiene, right? And Joe talked about this, this idea that cyber hygiene's key across this thing, and it's not brand new concept. So the ongoing support for industry leading standards from NIST, CIS, DISA, and other standards that you may be adopting or applying. Tenable supports those in spades, right? So a long history and commitment supporting basic cyber hygiene and shifting our approach to account for the modern attack surface. So with that, Haley and the group really appreciate the opportunity to present. Haley, I'm not sure if I can turn it back to you. We're open to answer any questions that the team may have. Anything from the team before we close? Thanks, Christine. I've got the chat window up here if anybody wants to ask via chat. If you don't want to come off mute, or like me, you may have an angry dog in the corner that you're trying to avoid everyone hearing.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Yolanda Dari Career. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
I was just wondering, I know Tenable has been around for a while, and I used to attend quite a few of your hands-on workshops back in the day. And I'm just wondering, how has your business profile changed in light of zero trust architecture and frameworks? Have you had to adjust quite a bit, or were you always in alignment in that direction, so to speak? Or were there great modifications and processes and people and technology?
Yeah, it's a great question, Yolanda. I'll try to, I could go on forever on this topic. So on how we've shifted to sort of modernize and address zero trust. I think zero trust was sort of running a parallel track with Tenable's trajectory. So, I'd say that, Tenable, I've been with Tenable for over 5 years now. And in my tenure here, they've made significant advancements in the sensor ecosystem I mentioned earlier. So, going from Nessus, where you're traditionally looking at IT assets, Tenable's forged, industry-leading sensors for web application scanning that I mentioned, container, and now these connectors into cloud environments. So Google, AWS, Azure, these platforms are things that we can, in the same data lake, bring all of that information together centrally. So I'd say that's a big area where we've advanced our mission and met the call for zero trust initiatives.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Thanks, Dean. So I'd say that's been a big level of maturity, that full level support of the modern attack surface, Yolanda. And then a huge advancement in our ability, I think, to make the data consumable is the stuff that Seth talked about, which is, we've created a lot of intelligence on top of this information to provide real-time or near real-time risk scoring, a dynamic risk score that changes daily based on what's happening in the real world, and allows zero trust to create a policy that now is informed by something that's highly dynamic. And that's really key. Again, CVSS is great. It's a measure, but it's one data point that we consider. We look at a whole host of different activities or different threats when we evaluate the risk score that we publish daily for everything that we enumerate. And that's based on dark web activity, real world threat landscape, a whole host of different measures that Seth spoke about. We think that intelligence automatically informs a zero trust policy engine in a way that makes us extremely unique moving forward. So I hope that gives you some perspective, Yolanda, and answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much. That was very detailed and informative and very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the question. What else? What else, group? Okay. I don't see, actually I see a question from Frank in in chat. Maybe I could put this to my fellow engineers in the team. How does your zero trust solution fit into SASE and SD-WAN? I don't know if the team has thoughts on that.
I can take that, Garrett.
Thanks, Seth.
So, secure access, service edge, software-defined WAN. Really, at the end of the day, this is just different ways for your network architecture to sort of integrate, right? And they are concepts that lead into this concept of zero trust, being able to say, this is the access point for integration A, B, and C. This is the access point for this user coming into a network. At the end of the day, we look at every single endpoint on the network, regardless of where it is. We look at cloud assets, we look at operational technology, et cetera. And we look at the risks that those provide. So whether you have a traditional network, whether you have a super modern network, whether you have something in between, at the end of the day, we're looking at the risk of the individual systems within that and helping to feed that data into the policy engine of zero trust so it can make a better decision.
Thanks, Seth. Frank, yeah, looks like I think we successfully answered Frank's question. What else, team? Open it up to the group. Any other questions for myself or the Tenable team? Great. Haley, I don't see further questions in chat. With that, thank you, everybody that joined the call on behalf of Tenable. It's a real pleasure to talk to the community. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, Seth, and Joe. We're happy to engage, talk to you directly, and we'd love to work with your enterprise or agency to dive into how we can help. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop recording.